stand. Please be seated.
Dr. Slack, before the break you gave evidence of you running some triad groups and also training other staff members so that they could run them in your absence. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you run a triad group on a Wednesday night?
Yes.
And was that was that a particular triad group, or was it just one that you...
We called it Advanced Triad Group,
and
in
what
which
was...
we were, excuse me, we were inviting persons maybe from Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous, or programs that were working with individuals who were in the process of recovery to come to the institution and be the X, the person in the group who used to have the problem and now does not, okay? Because recovery is very lengthy, but sometimes this individual who would come from the community to the advanced group would be a person who knew the nuances of recovery and might have been in a 12-step program herself.
And was that the only involvement of community members in Triad, or was community members invited to be involved in another way?
Well, one of the things that I think assisted with some of the programs that we were doing in Winlaton was the Winlaton Community Support Group, and that was a group of individuals who came into the institution maybe on a weekend when they knew that a young woman would not have company, and maybe they would arrange for a rock group to come in and perform for the young people in residence, or they would, suppose we set up a boutique so that the young persons, if they didn't have any clothes to go home and look like they felt comfortable in the clothes, or if they were going out for a job interview, we had a boutique, and the persons from the various fashion industries would bring clothes into our boutique. I was out there trying to lift the profile of Winlaton, that what we were trying to do, and people were responding to it. The community was responding to it. So you had a facility that had an awareness that these young women were going back into the community, and so we were trying to bring a bit of the community into the organization.
I want to move to the topic of the policy and procedures relating to child sexual abuse. When you arrived, there was a policy, a Winlaton manual,
yes,
is what I'm referring to for policy, dated 1974. Do you recall that there was nothing in that 1974 policy about sexual abuse?
I never read the 1974.
The policy, we know, was revised in 1980. You agreed with me before the break that you would have written the section relating to Triad.
Yes.
Do you recall now whether you wrote any of the remaining sections in that 1980 manual?
I don't remember, no.
The 1980 manual contains a process for critical incident, I'll withdraw that, for grievance hearings and serious incident hearings. Do you remember those
absolutely.
hearings taking place?
Yes.
Did you have any role in developing the policy for grievance or serious incident hearings?
Yes. What year was this one that you're talking about?
1980.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So were they something that you actively introduced in your time there?
Yes, I thought it was a method of handling individual escalating problems in the organization.
Right. Can I have on the screen, so you don't have to do anything, Dr. Slack, DHS.3001.001.0118. I'm going to show you the page relating to grievance hearings to start. Do you see there under procedural steps, the objective is to provide due process in a rational forum for examining the facts and stating the consequences for a major offence committed by a Winlaton trainee. Major offence was defined to include striking a staff and setting a fire. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And that led to a formal grievance hearing taking place. And if you have a look at number 9 on the grievance hearing, the student's advocate, her allocated youth officer, has responsibility to see that the decision and consequences about the trainee are carried out. And the youth officer is to assist the superintendent in preparing a court report if charges are pressed. So that action contemplated discipline for the trainee and a potential for the report to go to the police. Do you see that?
No, I don't.
I'll just read to you number 9 again because it's covered by some writing. Student's advocate, her allocated youth officer, has responsibility to see that the decision and consequences about the Winlaton trainee are carried out. AYO is to assist superintendent in preparing court report if charges are pressed. Court report is to include written statement of trainee about incident.
Yes, we're still talking about the grievance hearing.
Yes. And the grievance hearing was defined for 2 issues, a major offence which could be striking a staff or setting a fire. Do you remember grievance hearings being carried out?
For those 2 reasons, no.
Do you remember ever a report being made to the police while you were superintendent about the actions of a child in striking a staff or setting a fire?
No.
If you go down the page, if the operators would, to DHS.3004.001.0119, this is the serious incident hearing policy. It's for something different. The formal grievance hearing is reserved for the major incidents of assault on staff by a girl or setting a fire. The serious incident hearing can be set up to deal with serious incidents in which staff think that the behaviour of a trainee has endangered herself or others or has damaged property. This would include incidents such as vicious fighting between girls, attempted drownings, sexual assault and premeditated or continuous vandalism. Do you recall that that was the first policy designed under your watch for dealing with allegations of sexual assault?
Yes.
But do you agree that there's no provision under the serious incident hearing for an allegation of sexual assault to go to the police?
Yes, I see there's nothing written there.
Do you know why those issues were treated differently, so that an assault on a staff member might eventually be reported to the police, but an assault on a child by another resident or a sexual assault of the resident would not be contemplated for a report for the police?
When was this written?
1980.
I think that the 1987 manual of instructions would have included.
Dr. Slack, I'm going to come to that shortly.
Okay.
But in relation to the 1981, do you know why there was no contemplation that a report of sexual assault might go to the police in 1980?
I remember an allegation that I handled of sexual.
I'll come to, there's one allegation reported in your statement. I'll come to that.
Okay.
Do you know why this policy would have been written in a way in which there was no provision for a report of sexual assault of a child to go to the police?
Well, there was no information coming to me about sexual assault.
Do you know whether or not this serious incident hearing for sexual assault contemplated sexual assault of the residents by staff members?
It would include allegation, but I never heard of a sexual assault.
If you had heard of a sexual assault by a staff member in 1980, would it have been appropriate for that to be reported to the police?
Yes.
Does that suggest that this manual was only contemplating sexual assault between the residents, by a resident on another?
Yes.
So it wasn't even within the thinking of staff members, including yourself, that a resident could be sexually abused by staff?
I don't think it was outside the realm of happening, but it wasn't, according to this person, happening.
So there weren't any policies or procedures designed to facilitate investigation of sexual abuse by staff?
Yes, if I had heard that that was occurring, there would have been a serious incident hearing. Yes.
Do you agree that what this policy seems to reflect is a lack of awareness, as at 1980, of the possibility that children might be sexually abused by staff?
Yes, sad to say.
You referred earlier to the 1987 policy. For the benefit of my friends, this is in the Policy Tender Bundle Part A. Were you involved in revising the Manual of Guidelines and Procedures in 1987?
Yes.
As you mentioned to the Royal Commission, there is in that manual a procedure set out for dealing with sexual abuse, correct?
Yes.
Why was it that a procedure was developed in 1987 for dealing with sexual abuse of children?
I thought that there was something missing from that policy and that I wanted it put in.
If I could ask the operators to turn to page 113 of that manual, which is DHS.3127.002.0143. You'll see the Winlaton manual come up on your screen, Dr. Slack. It's headed at paragraph 51, Sexual Activity Overt in Winlaton Policy. And I'm going to go on to show you some other issues in relation to the policy. But that notes it's not Winlaton's task to take a moral stance for or against any sexual preferences. However, it is Winlaton's task to ensure that all persons within the institution are protected from sexual advances or exposure to overt sexual behaviour. Overt sexual activity is not permissible in Winlaton. This ban applies to young women in care, staff, voluntary workers and visitors alike. Do you recall any instruction from the department prior to 1987 that policies such as this should be developed?
No.
So it was your initiative to develop this policy?
Mm-hmm.
Did it reflect the fact that you were becoming increasingly aware of the possibility of sexual abuse of residents?
Well, the community was persons who came into Winlaton were coming from the community, and at that time there was a lot of sexual activity in the community, and I just wanted to make sure that the youth officers, all of us, especially Eileen, at least we had a policy in order to prevent it happening in Winlaton.
And you see at 51.3 there, sexual counselling and programs were available. They were made available from youth officers, social workers, psychologists, medical staff for any young women who need such assistance. Mm-hmm. In order for you to be aware that a young woman needed such assistance, it would have to be reported to you by one of the youth officers or other supervisors, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Unless a young person reported it to you herself in triad or when you were walking around.
Well, it wasn't coming to me from triads.
So if you turn over the page, or if that's scrolled down for you, 52.1 notes that a sexual assault allegation must be drawn to the attention of the manager. Was the manager you in those circumstances?
Yes.
In all cases of alleged sexual assault, the manager of Winlaton must be advised as soon as possible by the chief youth officer of the section concerned, and there was provision for written reports. Mm-hmm. 52.2, once an allegation is made, a hearing is to be called by the officer in charge of the section or school at the earliest possible moment, involving the parties concerned and any witnesses, to ascertain whether the allegation is serious or trivial, based on misunderstanding or with mischievous intent.
Yes.
Do you recall any such hearings being heard?
I called one.
And that was in relation to a staff member, is that correct?
Yes, and the accusation was perving.
What was meant by perving?
The young women would say to me that by perving they meant an officer, a woman or a man, that when they were either undressing or when they were getting ready to go to bed or when they were taking a shower or when they were going to the toilet or when they were doing anything, maybe shaving hair from their genitals, whatever it was, somebody was staring at them.
And this particular instance, it was a maintenance or security worker, correct?
That was the allegation, yes.
Okay. And so you called a hearing. You told the principal youth officer to inform privately your two deputy superintendents. The principal youth officer spoke to the man in question about what was happening, and you informed him that the information was passed to him that you would meet with him and an advocate of his choice from amongst the Winlaton employees. You set this out at paragraph 43.
Excuse me while I get it.
Thank you. You note at paragraph 43 that the young woman concerned and the youth officer making the initial report were invited to attend.
Yes.
The man had reservations about attending, but he eventually agreed to attend.
Yes.
And the young woman was told she did not have to attend if not required.
She had a choice, yes.
So at the hearing, she didn't attend, but the description of what had occurred was read aloud by her youth officer.
Yes.
And the male in that circumstance admitted to perving on the child, is that right?
Yes.
Do you recall what he said about it?
No.
You note there you have that to your, I withdraw that, I'll read what you write about it. The cited male in the situation admitted his indiscretion as a once-off mistake, implying such behaviour by him would not happen again. To my knowledge, this behaviour never occurred again. I reminded all present that the details of the hearing were strictly confidential. In that circumstance, do you agree that the male there had admitted to an offence of indecently dealing with the child and perving on her in a sexual way?
An offence that would be criminal?
Did you consider that he may have committed a criminal offence in those circumstances?
Well, when I listened to the description that the young woman had help writing up, she had help from her allocated youth officer because she needed help in writing it up. It didn't strike me that he glanced in, something like this, I don't know. He glanced in at her and it startled her and she wanted to make sure the youth officer knew that it had happened. It didn't seem like anything that went on or there was no touching, so I thought it could be handled by a serious incident.
Okay. So, Dr. Slack, what you write in paragraph 43 is that the maintenance worker was said to have been glaring through the small inside window of the resident's bedroom as she was undressing. And over the page, still in paragraph 43, the male in the situation admitted his one-off indiscretion as a once-off mistake. It appears, doesn't it, that what he admitted to doing was deliberately looking into the window to pervert the young woman as she was undressing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And do you recall roughly the year at which you dealt with this incident?
No, I tried to remember and I didn't want to make up something.
I take it from what you've said to the Royal Commission already that you didn't give any consideration to reporting that matter to police?
That would be correct. I wanted to let the staff know that the perving would be considered by me very serious and that I wanted it to stop. And I also wanted the persons and the staff to know that that kind of situation was not acceptable to me.
Did you have any concerns that that man was not a suitable person to be working at Winlaton if he was perving on a girl while she was undressing?
As you ask me, yes.
Does it reflect a different attitude in those days, at the time you were at Winlaton and dealing with this, to the gravity of a male staff member perving on a girl?
Yes, it was indicative of an attitude, and I'm sorry that I probably picked it up too.
In relation to your preparation of the policy manual in 1987, did you have any support from other staff for the introduction of that reporting policy?
Yes, when I was talking to Dr. Charles about it, I said that I wanted him to talk to youth officers and various ranks in the organization so that with good input we would get that policy correct. And he was saying, well, am I supposed to spell out what you're talking about in terms of inappropriate behavior? And I said, well, touching the breasts, inappropriate, fondling or touching or putting fingers into the vagina would be inappropriate.
So was it Dr. Charles who actually helped you to develop that policy?
Yes.
I see. And any other staff members at Winlaton who were involved in the development of that policy?
I can't remember exactly which ones, but I think I asked him to give credit who had helped him with the entire document, but I don't know who had helped on those areas.
So it was Dr. Charles who actually wrote that policy for the inclusion in the 1987 manual, is that right?
With my input, yes.
Dr. Slack, I referred you before the break to the particular conversation you have with a child that was recorded and replayed on the DVD, Winnie Girls. That was a child who had been the victim of a rape by her father, and you discussed that with her. In those circumstances, other parts of the tape that we have access to suggest that there was a report made to police in those circumstances.
Good.
Do you have a recollection of that?
No, I do not. But I was relieved when I heard that.
You have told the Royal Commission to date that you were unaware that there were hundreds of girls in Winlaton who had also been the subject of rape from their father.
Yes.
One of the cases that you know about as a result of the Royal Commission is the case of BGD, who, as you know, was in Winlaton in 1979 when you were superintendent, correct?
Yes.
That was the first year that you had taken over as superintendent, or the second year?
79, excuse me, would have been the first year. Acting, I think I was acting for a while.
Have you read the statement of BGD? Have you read the annexures attached to her statement?
Yes.
You will be aware then that for BGD there were a significant number of staff members at Winlaton who were aware that she had been raped by her father before coming into Winlaton,
yes,
and that he was an ongoing predator towards her.
Yes, he was, definitely.
And that included Jennifer Lyons, now Mitchell, one of her workers, Michael Groom, a psychologist, and Marilyn Minister, who was the Deputy Superintendent, correct?
That's right.
Amongst others, agreed?
Yes.
Did you ever find out that BGD was in that situation?
No.
You did not participate in these weekly case conferences that,
no, I did not.
That the Royal Commission has heard about?
I would have expected to be told.
You would have expected your deputy,
yes,
Marilyn Minister?
Absolutely.
If you had been told that BGD was in care because she had been raped by her father, and then you heard that he wanted to visit her in Winlaton, what would your attitude have been?
I would have been very strong in my position that that was not to go ahead.
And as superintendent, you could have ordered that he not be allowed to visit.
Yes, absolutely.
And would you have done?
He was not, absolutely. He was not to, I think if I recall, he had 2 visits into the institution when I was reading that material, and I would have been absolutely livid and very clearly giving directions that he was not to come.
What the Royal Commission knows about is that there were at least 2 visits
yes,
from BGD's father. There may well have been more. What you will have read in the annexures is that in May 1979, possibly the 22nd of May 1979, a note taken that father visited, a sensual visit, very close-knit, not normal father-daughter relationship, obvious to everyone. You read that?
Yes, I read it.
How did you feel about that when you read it?
I felt that the fact that he had come in and the fact that this young woman was visited by him was a real breach of our procedures to protect a young person.
What procedure to protect? A written procedure, are you referring to?
It would be a written procedure, but also I would have instructed when I did not know that this was the case, but when I found out, if I had found out, okay, I would have put a stop to the visit.
Do you agree there's no written procedure that says a child who has been the victim of incest
Yes.
and their father can't be visited by that
Yes,
child?
that's an omission.
You also agree that it's just a matter of common sense in the protection of a child that you would never allow
Never,
the
ever.
perpetrator of that offence to visit her.
Never,
in detention
ever.
centre.
And at the back of the manual, as I remember it, we left some blank pages because it would have been, my intention to revise it again and put that section in.
Dr. Slack, you will have read in the annexures a memorandum which is dated the 13th of June 1979 from Maryland Minister to Michael Groom. She notes that BGD's father phoned her the day previous to ask permission to visit BGD, and permission was granted. Permission was granted a week after a visit in which the father's behaviour was noted to be sensual, very close-knit and not normal father-daughter relationship. Do you accept that that was a gross breach of the duty
Absolutely.
of Winlaton to protect that child?
Absolutely, gross breach.
If you had found out about that when you were superintendent, would you have disciplined Miss Minister?
I would have been working with her to understand the whole situation. And in terms of discipline, I would have been asking her, person to person, what was your thinking on all of this? Because it certainly wasn't mine. And what was your thinking? Did you consider that maybe I ought to be involved in this serious situation? And Mrs. Minister would be very cooperative, and we had that kind of a relationship that I wouldn't be jumping all over her, but I would say I definitely was disappointed.
Were you aware that Miss Minister had a particular attitude towards sexual abuse of children by their parents? Did you ever discuss that with her?
No.
BGD, in her statement, which you've read, says this about that visit. I felt like a robot that had stopped feeling and began self-harming again. To this day, I still consider the day that my father visited me as one of the greatest betrayals of my life. His visit made me feel that there was nowhere to escape from him. How do you feel about that? That happened?
Tragedy. A tragedy.
If you had found out that Miss Minister allowed BGD's father to visit in circumstances where he was then behaving inappropriately in a sexual manner to her, would you have reported that to the police?
Yes. I would have had, well, this is in hindsight, of course, but I would have taken an immediate, if I found out from Mrs. Minister or from anyone that this was going on, I would have immediately said to them, what I want is the information from the case file, the information from whatever my deputy superintendent with programs knew about it, or Mrs. Minister, the deputy superintendent of classification, knew about it. And I would, I would say to them, I would be jumping around saying, within an hour, please bring all this detail to my office.
Would you have caused the police to be informed of his predatory behaviour towards the child?
Yes.
What you will have discovered is that on the 9th of August 1979, what actually happened is that a letter signed by Jennifer Lyons and with Michael Groom's, not signature, but name written underneath it, a letter was sent to BGD's father saying this, including these words: you both seem to care very much for each other, but BGD has told us that your relationship has been a sexual one for some time. And when she first came to Winlaton, she asked us for help in sorting out her feelings about this. It goes on to say, none of us wants to make you feel bad, but we do want BGD to feel better about her relationship with you. In 1979, would you have deemed that to be an appropriate letter to send to a father who was raping their child?
No, totally inappropriate. I mean, absolutely awful.
You're aware that BGD was allowed to have home visits where she went to her mother's house. Was there any risk assessment process in place to...
Not that I know.
Okay. Do you agree that that was an oversight in the care of children?
Major oversight.
What we know from BGD, from a file note at BGD 19, she reports to Michael Groom on the 20th of June 1979, bad weekend, father made sexual advances which she refused. Would you have expected a report to go to police?
Yes.
In those circumstances?
Absolutely.
Where it was very obvious, wasn't it, this child was continuing to be sexually abused by their
and
father?
I believe she was calling for help.
Was that ever drawn to your attention at the time?
No.
Wasn't that an oversight in the hierarchy of complaint?
Absolutely.
Do you accept that because staff did not act to protect BGD at Winlaton, that facilitated the abuse continuing for many, many years?
Yes. And I really regret that that young woman had to experience that.
One of the other residents who's given evidence is BHE. I've already taken you to some of her evidence. She was in Winlaton from 1971 through to 1977. She reports being abused, sexually abused by staff member Mr McIntyre. Did you recall Ross McIntyre? Mm-hmm. So you need to answer yes.
Yes. I remember meeting him. I didn't have much involvement with him, but he would, maybe come in and say hello, or I would see him walking on the grounds and we would just wave.
Did you ever receive a report of any sexual abuse by Mr McIntyre?
No.
BHE also reports being sexually abused by girls in Gunya on a number of occasions. She notes there are about 20 girls in Gunya. They all had to share a room with another girl, and she recalls sharing a room with a prostitute at some stage.
That was on Leewara.
I'm sorry?
Is that on Leewara?
She was in Gunya.
Gunya, okay.
And she recalls that one day, during the day, one of the girls came into the room and sexually abused her. She felt helpless against them. She was too scared to dob them in afterwards because she knew there'd be repercussions. Do you agree that for that account, I withdraw that. Do you agree that that account, if you accept it, reflects the fact that there was inadequate supervision of the girls during the day?
Yes, very, very much. Terrible.
Do you recall a culture where girls were getting themselves in further trouble if they were branded laggers or dobbers? They were subjected to further abuse?
Yes.
You can understand in those circumstances where that child would feel too scared to report the abuse?
Absolutely. Mm.
How do you feel about that happening in Gunya at a time in Winlaton?
Awful. I mean, I keep saying that I felt it was awful, but it was more than that. It was just that it was just a terrible occurrence, horrifying occurrence, that any child would be subjected to this kind of behavior, and I'm sitting in or standing around, walking around, and I'm ignorant of it. Hard to believe, but true.
There's one further resident that I want to draw to your attention. You have probably read this already, Dr. Slack. BDF was in Winlaton briefly in 1986 and again in 1987 for a period of around 4 months. She's the child who describes being locked up in Winbirra in a cell on remand. She also describes sexual abuse by BFG, her roommate. She describes sexual abuse on movie nights and sexual abuse in the yard. Do you recall movie nights being held at Winlaton?
Vaguely. Yes. The youth would ask for, could they have movie nights at least on a Sunday. Mm-hmm.
And you recall that the Goonyu girls were allowed to attend the movie nights?
Yes.
Did you ever attend the movie nights?
No.
Who was expected to supervise movie nights?
With officers from whatever section the young women came from.
You will have read that what is described by BDF is nights where the Goonyu girls sat in the front row. On some nights after the lights were turned out, she was physically taken down to the front row by some of the Goonyu girls, physically held down in a seat while some of the girls sexually abused her, consisting of fondling and penetration.
This is terrible, yes.
That's horrific abuse for a child, isn't it?
Absolutely, but it also said that I thought she said there were at least 4 officers. That was just, you know.
She says there were about 4 staff members present in the room during those nights, and that would reflect a fundamental breach.
A fundamental failure.
She also discusses sexual abuse at Winlaton in the yard. One occasion when she was walking around the yard and was grabbed by 3 older girls from Winlaton. They pushed her in the wall of the swimming pool building, and one of the girls held her shoulder while another girl penetrated her vagina with her fingers. That would have been extremely traumatising and damaging for that child.
Absolutely, yes.
And it again reflects a fundamental failure of staff to provide her with adequate supervision.
Yes. Or if they saw that this was happening, that they would make sure that they had it stopped.
Was one of the failures to supervise caused by a lack of adequate staffing?
That would be one reason, yes.
And did you draw the lack of adequate staffing to the attention of the department during your time as superintendent?
I was constantly doing that. Mm-hmm.
And when you were, on the occasions when you did that, were your pleas for assistance heard or met in any way?
No, they were not. Also, it indicated to me that when I was reading it after the fact, that our training was remiss. I mean, 4 youth officers standing in the back of a room and this young woman being escorted by the Goonyu youth to the front. It's very out of order in what was going on.
What do you mean out of order in what was going on?
Where was the supervision? They're huddling in the back. That was the implication when she was writing.
You expected more from your staff, didn't you?
Yeah.
Did you at any stage ever actively ask staff how those movie nights were going, whether there were any difficulties?
No.
Was there ever any issues drawn to your attention at any of the meetings that you had from staff?
No.
Earlier, before the break, I was asking you about your understanding of the policy of girls being searched when they came back into Winlaton at times. You thought it would have been a soft pat-down?
Well, it would be like under the arms to see if they're holding something. That's all I mean. Okay, nothing by the breasts, nothing by the genitals, nothing by the behind. Okay, but were they just hiding something?
That was your expectation of how those searches would be carried out?
Absolutely.
Did you ever attend on any of those searches to see how they were being done?
No.
There was nothing in the manual about making sure that the privacy of children was respected during those searches, agreed?
That would be an oversight.
That would be an oversight? Dr. Slack, in your statement, you comment on the protection of the residents. You note that you have been advised since the Royal Commission started of the sexual abuse of residents, including those 3 girls that I drew your attention to.
Yes.
You say you were shocked and devastated by that. But you recognise that your ignorance of those issues is in some way due to a failure of the institution itself. Is that correct?
And my own failure. The buck stops with me.
In your statement, you finish with 2 paragraphs. Would you like to read those onto the record?
Sure. Yes. On 4th August 2015, when advised that sexual abuse of residents had occurred during my time as superintendent of Winlaton, I was shocked and devastated. I had not at this stage been made aware of the details of such sexual abuse as experienced by the 5 young victims named in the Royal Commission's correspondence to me. However, I accept that it occurred and have no excuse for my ignorance. My ignorance is inexcusable. Whilst my words and thoughts are inadequate, I want to sincerely apologize to each and every victim of this insidious and inhumane abuse. I feel unable to express my horror and to express my deep shame that you experienced sexual assaults with me as your superintendent. As your superintendent, each and every one of you had the right to expect my protection.
And the last paragraph, Dr. Slack, or I can do that?
I don't mind it.
If you feel comfortable, please do.
I can go forward. I live now with the regret and guilt of having failed you and your loved ones. Despite my best efforts, it is now apparent that my policies and communication procedures up and down Winlaton were woefully inadequate. I am deeply sorry for the pain my management inadequacies inflicted on you. I will forever remain acutely distressed in the knowledge of the pain and the trauma each of you endured while residents at Winlaton.
Thank you, Dr. Slack. I have nothing further.
Mr. O'Brien.
Madam, my name's O'Brien and I represent VGD.
Hello, Mr. O'Brien.
Good afternoon. Now, I read, and of course my client also has read your statement. Do you understand that? And we're left with the view that you seem to think that you made Winlaton somehow a better place. Is that your view?
I can't take that view after I've listened to this.
You say that in your statement, I'm paraphrasing obviously, that you came to a place which was obviously dysfunctional and riotous. That's right?
That's correct.
And you tried and endeavoured to do positive things within its walls.
That's right. Every single day.
And you say, I withdraw that. It seems from the statement that you've provided to this Royal Commission that you think that a lot of what you did was positive.
Not a lot. Not when I listened. I sat through what these women said.
Well, this statement was provided before you heard that evidence, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you'd appreciate, to the extent that it does reveal that view, the view that you think you did something positive with Winlaton, that's very hollow. Those are very hollow words for young girls who were abused within Winlaton. You accept that?
I accept that, yes.
And to the extent that you claim that you were a catalyst for positive change within that organisation, do you accept that they would be quite within their rights to think that that was not the case?
Mm-hmm.
And it's fair to say in your evidence today that you acknowledge gross failings by you
yes.
in your
superintendent role at Winlaton. Mm-hmm. Failings that caused untold misery for large numbers of girls who went through the institution. You accept that? Is that right?
Yes.
You were asked about the number of children, girls who went through Winlaton who you knew to be sexually assaulted by interfamilial relations. Remember being asked that by Councillor Sisting?
Yes.
And you said that you weren't aware of the numbers that others have given evidence about having gone through the place. And
yes.
Do you then disagree with the evidence of people like Marilyn Minister who've said that there were hundreds of girls in her time?
Do I doubt her? No, I accept it.
And you've accepted also that there were no policies in place that dealt with those type of situations and how those girls would be managed.
That's correct.
And in the case of BGD, it is abundantly clear that no effective protection from her father was offered. Is that right?
Yes.
And indeed, it seems she was exposed to his brutality and his abuse within the walls and confines of Winlaton itself. That's obviously what did take place.
Big breakdown. It's terrible.
And in addition to that, it appears that you yourself did not become aware not only of the large number of incest survivors who were coming through your institution, but also you had no policy of being alerted to the fact that that was what was going on.
Well, I met weekly with the two classifications, the classification and the program deputy superintendents, and neither one of them raised that issue with me. My failure was I did not ask the right questions of them.
They didn't raise it with you?
No.
And you didn't ask them about it?
No.
And you think that they ought to have raised those?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
Would you mean to say that in let's say 1979, you expected your subordinates to relay to you those type of matters?
Absolutely, yes.
And you say that because you think that you dealt with it then as a matter of utmost gravity?
Most sincere, yes.
And you say to the Royal Commission, do you, that you thought even then that that was the sort of information that ought to be relayed up to you?
Absolutely.
But you accept, do you not, that there was no procedure or policy that would ensure that you received that information? Is that what you say?
Yes.
Do you accept that your staff did not receive any guidance from you about how to deal with survivors of incest within Winlaton?
That's correct.
That is, they didn't receive any guidance from you in how to deal with it in a manner which reflected the gravity with which you viewed it even at that time.
Yes, I was trusting that I would hear about it, and if I heard about it, I would have acted.
Is it possible, Madam, that in fact you didn't deal with it with the same sort of gravity that you say that you now think that you did?
Say that again, please.
Certainly. Is it possible that in 1979 you didn't deal with it with procedures, with policies, with expectations and guidelines with staff because you didn't think that it was this serious?
Had I
Say that you
known,
did.
had I known, I would have dealt it with extreme seriousness.
Can the witness be shown BGD 5, please? This is a document which was prepared by Brian Fitzgerald, a welfare officer, and then responsible for the care by the Department of BGD. Do you recognise that document?
No.
Can we go down to the bottom of that document, please? And you'll see the signature and name, Brian Fitzgerald, welfare officer, 5th
Yes.
of April 1979.
Yes.
If we go back to the top then, it relays the events leading up to and subsequent admission of BGD to Winlaton Youth Training Centre on Saturday the 31st of March 1979. You see that?
No, picture has to be lifted further.
You see at the very top of that screen there, that's what it sets out.
Beginning with 15 to 79.
In the paragraph above that, I've just read that paragraph, you see events leading up to, etc.
Yes, I see that.
Okay. And then there's a chronology of events.
Yes.
Where she has been placed and then absconded from various hostels and homes.
Yes.
And then at the bottom of that page,
31-3, 79, is that what you're referring to?
well, that paragraph that's there
Paragraph,
now
okay.
on the screen, you can see that she absconded from a Kildonan teenage unit on Friday, March 30th, 1979. There were some telephone calls made by her indicating that she was with her father. That was deemed problematic. You understand?
Yes.
And then it appears that the department arranged for the police to apprehend her and take her to Winlaton. You see that?
Yes, I do.
So you understand that was the nature and set of circumstances that gave rise to her being placed in your care.
Yes.
And that wasn't an uncommon thing, was it? That a girl in her position would be placed in your care as a ward of the state.
Would not be uncommon.
And it was obvious you'd accept from the material that's you've examined now that it was obvious not only to the department but to Winlaton staff when she was received there that she was the victim of sexual abuse
Continuous, yes.
at her father's hands.
Yes.
Right? Now, one of the things that it appears you and your staff attempted to do with someone in her position was offer her, amongst other forms of intervention, offer her therapy with triad therapy, right?
That would have been offered to her, yes.
And to that extent, and I don't intend to ask you a lot of questions about the theory behind that type of therapy, you understand, because council assistants covered all of that, all right? Then if we put up BGD 7, please. You can see that says it's a first term review dated the 6th of April 1979.
Who has written this?
Well, I was going to ask if you could identify that. Is that a document that might have been prepared at Winlaton?
Yes, not by me.
No. Well, it has the name C. Hodges. Do you recognise that person or that name?
The person may have been a youth officer, but I'm not sure.
Catriona Hodges, Catriona, Katrina Hodges.
I don't recognize the name.
Thank you. And it's a first term review, so that might be the first term which she was there at Winlaton. Is that a possibility?
Yes.
Okay. And it seems to have been dated about a week after she's been there within your facility. Do you accept that?
Yes.
What it then goes on to say is that BGD is at Winlaton for a couple of weeks as a result of having run away from the unit. There have been some questions of whether the father was interfering with her sexually. BGD says this is the main reason for the arguments at home. You see all that?
No, you've lost me in the paragraph. Which one are you on, please? How does it start?
The first paragraph. Just have a look at that first
BGD
paragraph.
is at Winlaton for a couple of weeks?
Yes.
That's what you read, yes. It is
You can
felt.
see where I've read from?
Yes.
I want to take you to the next sentence, the next full sentence. It is felt that the triad therapy will help BGD once she stops blaming everyone else for her problems instead of facing up to her own failings. You see?
I see it.
Now,
It's blaming her.
so this is a young girl who's been brought into your care because of concerns that the department have about her being with her father when she should be in a unit. You understand that? And
Yes.
within a week, they decide it seems your institutions decide that she's going to be benefited by triad therapy. That's the case, isn't it?
That's what they're saying there, but
And that wasn't an unusual type of thing to occur in 1979. You'd expect someone to be brought in those circumstances. They might get some benefit from triad therapy. Is that right?
perhaps it benefited some. It did not benefit everybody. Had its weaknesses.
It says next, at the moment, she's not saying much in the therapy meetings, but is exhibiting a lot of anger.
Where are you now, please?
That's the last sentence in that same paragraph.
Okay, got it.
Okay. So this is a place, certainly under your stewardship, in April of 1979, is it not?
April of 79, yes.
And you're expecting a state ward such as her, who's been apprehended essentially because of the incestual relationship that her father's having with her. That's right, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And you're expecting that she's going to benefit...
No, I'm not expecting.
Okay.
This was a youth officer. I'm not expecting.
Your youth officer is expecting that she's going to benefit from this therapy.
That would be correct. She would hope, I guess.
Which was implemented during your reign at Winlaton, yes?
76, beginning in 1976.
And was the prominent and primary type of intervention offered at Winlaton in relation to problems and case management, correct?
It was an important program, yes, that we were trying to strengthen and make available to the young women. And they could choose if they're going to say anything or they're not going to say anything.
Well, that concept of choice is not relayed in that paragraph that I've just read to you, is it?
No.
It is felt that it will help her, correct?
That's what this young officer was hoping.
And that was, well, I'm suggesting that was not only what this officer was hoping, but that was what your program, your triad program, was expecting to happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That you would have expected her engagement in this program, wouldn't you?
Not if I knew her background, not if I knew how she was being sexually assaulted by her father. I would not be expecting that in this triad group program that this woman would feel comfortable to talk about this sexual interference with her by her father.
Well, we've heard an audio from the Winnie Girls documentary. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Wherein you participate with a young girl from Winlaton in a mini triad meeting, correct? Mm-hmm. Where someone with almost identical difficulties to BGD is spoken to you in a triad meeting, correct?
Mm-hmm. Your Honour, I object to that. It was not a triad meeting. It was a mini triad meeting, which was a very different sort of meeting with far fewer people. In fact, only the 3 people and not the other observers around. And that needs to be made clear, Your Honour, in my submission.
Well, I'm reading the transcript. I did make that clear. You were participating in a mini triad meeting with a girl in similar or even identical circumstances to those of BGD, right?
Right.
So how can you possibly give evidence to this Royal Commission today that there wasn't your expectation that BGD would be to participate in these triad meetings or therapy, as is set out in this youth workers'
He would have been
statement?
speaking about the larger group. He would be talking about a group that would have maybe 8 to 10 people in it, where she would be hesitant.
Okay, well, let's take it that what you say is correct. You wouldn't have expected it in 1979 that she would be in a large group situation. That's evidently what was planned and what was taking place, isn't it?
You mean from the words of this youth officer?
From the words of this youth officer and the evidence of BGD herself, that's what took place, isn't it?
What do you think my position on that would be, from what I've shared today?
Well, I'm investigating that of you, madam. I'm asking you whether it was expected that she would be giving her account of her problems in a group setting such as the ones that she's said she did.
I would not have expected her to be doing that.
And in the ones that set out in this document and others that she did. You didn't expect that. Mm. You were shown policy frameworks which talk about how triad's expected to work. Mm-hmm. You were taken to a list of numbered types of problems and concerns that people could discuss. Mm-hmm. Do you accept that there was, in none of those documents, in not one of those documents, was there any prohibition on this type of problem being discussed at triad meetings?
There was no prohibition? What do you mean, please?
Well, there was no guidelines or prohibition suggesting that it wasn't appropriate for young girls to
they wouldn't be discussing
relationships with their father or family members.
No, there was no guideline on it, but I would be very hesitant to even think that some young woman would be bringing up that they just did not do it.
Well, you heard, did you not, the evidence of BGD?
Mm-hmm.
You've read, I'm sure, a number of the annexures within this, within BGD's statement, which show that she was bringing up these things at group meetings.
Well, Your Honour, I am going to the framework. Pardon me a moment of that. The evidence of BGD, Your Honour, and I don't have the page references up. Neglected to have it printed up. She certainly had no memory of bringing it up at triad meetings, and clearly when she was being asked about triad meetings, BGD was referring to the larger group setting in which there would be a number of other people involved. So I just...
What do you rely on Mr O'Brien for, the basis for the question?
It comes on paragraph 48 of her statements, directly under the heading Disclosures of Sexual Abuse at Winlaton, wherein BGD talks about triad therapy, a form of group behavioural therapy. We got together in small groups and talked about any issues we had at Winlaton. I remember that the triad therapy program was overseen by Eileen Schlack. I rely on that. Secondly, as a bundle of material from which the inevitable inference can be drawn, are the personal reviews which form the annexures BGD 9, BGD 13, BGD 14, BGD 22. All of those talk about problems working through in groups. The inevitable conclusion, and of course I rely on instructions, but those documents themselves are the basis for the inference that there were such meetings, that they did take place, and for the premise of the question.
But I understood the question was based on something that demonstrated that BGD was bringing up the issues at group meetings.
Sorry. Yes. That's the question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not insisting that this witness necessarily knew that. So there might be an inference that's available that she did. But I'm not suggesting that to her. I'm simply suggesting that that was inevitably what was expected to have occurred and did occur. It's not only drawn from the document that's been recently referred to, BGD 7, but also those varied documents and the statement of BGD herself.
Your Honour, may I just briefly respond to that? I don't have any problem with Mr O'Brien asking questions about what the expectations were,
yes,
what BGD herself felt her experience with the triad was. But I do draw the Commission's attention to the questions that were asked of BGD, specifically about whether she talked about this in the triad, the group triad session, and she certainly says at one stage, I am not sure, and then she's asked, do you remember it ever being discussed at triad? And she says, no, I don't. So I just, the objection I take is to the premise that
I understood
it was
that.
actually disclosed.
I understood that, and I understood that was the objection, which is why I asked that question of Mr O'Brien.
The question was asked of BGD by counsel assisting. It seems that around transcript page 9163 or thereabouts. Did you talk about your father raping you at any of those sessions? And the answer was, I'm not sure. That's that. then...
So you're asking Dr Slack about her expectation as to whether or not BGD will do that? All right. So perhaps if you,
My
if you put the
expectation
question
was
in those terms, just a moment, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you ask the question in those terms, Mr O'Brien.
Certainly, thank you. Dr Slack, the suggestion I'm putting to you is that there was an expectation, at least within Winlaton, even if it wasn't your own, that girls involved in girls who were survivors of incest would be discussing those difficulties at triad meetings and triad therapy. Do you accept that?
This is one youth officer's minutes or notes. I would not have expected, because of the sensitivity and the gravity and the confusion that this young woman was going through, that this would be, it would be not my expectation that this would be brought up in group.
Okay. Thank you. I want to take you to, just before I leave that document, it is obvious, is it not, that this this youth officer had an expectation that BGD would be assisted by triad therapy, correct?
That was that youth officer's expectation.
Thank you. Now, I want to take you next then, if I can, to document BGD 9. Ms. Minister has given some evidence about these Winlaton classification/review personal report sheets. Do you see them? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
You're familiar with this document? Not with this document, but these forms, sorry?
Yes.
And you see
I knew they existed. They did not cross my desk. They existed.
Right, okay, very well. And you see that this is a BGD has on the 18th of April, some 3 weeks or thereabouts after she's been admitted to Winlaton, she's provided a personal review report sheet. You can see that, can't you?
Yes.
And if we go down through those headings, it says that she's first asked if she wants to attend. It's then asked what's going on in her life. It's heading number 2. Heading number 3, what do you want to happen in your life? You see, and then number 4, state what you think, my most serious problem, parenthesis, problems which I am working on in groups is/are, please explain. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And then she says, my most serious problem is a relationship with my father. Stop, as my father has an emotional hold over me. Stop, he has forced me to have sex with him. You see that?
Yes, but I'm going up to my most serious problems, which I am working on in groups. Okay? That does not say that she did that.
Right, okay. But you expect, you understand that it suggests, does it not, that those are the problems that she's working on in groups?
I can't answer how she was interpreting that, my most serious problem that I'm working on in groups.
Are you seriously suggesting that she didn't relay these issues in group therapy?
Well, Your Honour, I object to that question. How could she possibly be asked to speculate about that?
Very well, I withdraw the
An
question.
unfair question.
I'll withdraw the question. You don't know whether she did or didn't divulge this type of information in group therapy, do you? You don't know that.
I would take a position, sir, that she would not do it.
Okay. This document seems to suggest that she did, correct?
That document could have been totally understood by her. I suggest that it was not, because she would not be inclined to discuss such a sensitive, painful issue as sex with her father.
I'm suggesting not whether or not she was inclined to. I'm suggesting to you she was encouraged to.
I suggest you're incorrect.
I want to take you to MGD 11, please.
Do you mean BGD, Mr O'Brien?
Oh, sorry, BGD. Sorry, yes. BGD 11. It's another, is it there? Yeah. It's another personal report sheet, this time dated the 8th of May 1979. You can see that?
Yes.
At about the middle of her stay at Winlaton, correct?
The middle of her stay in 79. I'm not certain what the middle of her stay was.
Anyway, she's at Winlaton at that date on the 8th of May 1979. You accept that?
I do.
Okay. And again, we go down to the fourth question and responses, set of responses. State what you think my most serious problems which I'm working on in groups are, please explain. And she writes, again, you can read that to yourself, but again she relays the difficulty that she has in dealing with her father essentially abusing her. Read it to yourself, please.
I don't understand why it was all crossed off.
Well, it goes down into the next page. Perhaps it can be...
Do you understand why it was all crossed off? I mean, what does that mean? Did she do it?
If you don't mind just reading it, please, to yourself.
I'll read it out loud to myself. Okay.
Go down, if it can be scrolled down, please. Can be scrolled... Yeah, oh, sorry, down, I mean up. Thanks. There's a second page. You can see, again, she's spoken in this personal report sheet about the relationship she has with her father, who the staff at Winlaton know is raping her.
She says, excuse me, do you have a question for me?
You can see that that's what she's saying, or the essence of what she's saying.
I asked for help. I didn't expect people to tell me to stop seeing my father. I asked for help. I could only think that was not in group. I asked for help, even though it says, I would think that she saw that as, what is your biggest problem? And she listed what she felt was her biggest problem.
You are, I expect, speculating there, aren't
you? Yes.
So that's one possibility, isn't it? She raised it outside of a group, correct?
Yes.
Isn't another possibility quite open, given where this revelation has been documented, that it's also something she's raising in group therapy?
Well, again, Your Honour, that's still calling for the doctor to speculate about it. Clearly, the situation is that there are many possibilities, and one would have to concede any possibility is open, Your Honour.
Which is not really an objection to the question, Mr O'Brien, so I'll let you put it.
Thanks. You're suggesting in that answer that one possibility is that she's not raising it in groups, she's raising it other than in groups, correct?
Absolutely.
And I'm suggesting to you that there is obviously another possibility that is one of the things she's raising in groups.
No, sir.
You don't think that's a possibility?
It could be a possibility. We're all in this area of possibilities. Yes, it could be a possibility, and I say it wouldn't have happened.
You see, there are two other personal report sheets which dated the 22nd of May 1979 and the 5th of June 1979, again she raises in her own hand that very issue that she's discussing in her groups. Do you understand that that's...
Not discussing in her groups. She's raising that question with someone.
So, you accept, do you not, that the young girl that you're talking to in the audio recording at Winnie Girls is a girl suffering from incest?
In 1977, yes.
And that's someone who you thought would be benefited by a mini-triad intervention, correct?
With me. Mm-hmm.
And it has been recorded in that way?
With my type of questioning, which was not appropriate, which I have said.
In fact, you've agreed that it was terrible.
Absolutely.
But in 1977, when... Do you remember that documentary being made about Winlaton?
No.
No.
I don't remember it.
But it's fair to say that this was something, this type of intervention or therapy with this particular young girl was something you were quite proud of at that time.
Quite proud of.
Well, it was,
I was introducing it. I was trusting and teaching and working my ASS off for people to understand 12-step programs, of which this was one, being introduced into a residential care.
In the case of a girl who was a survivor of incest, right?
Whether she wanted to speak about it in a group was up to her.
Well, not only was she speaking about it in a group, it was being audio recorded for the purpose of the documentary.
You were talking about the audio now. I'm sorry. Can you mind starting again?
Not only was she speaking about it in a group, this young girl on the audio recording.
Audio, okay, 77.
It was being recorded for the purpose of a documentary, yes?
Oh, you want to know, I object to that question entirely. It was not being recorded for the purposes of a documentary being produced. The documentary wasn't produced until 2000, as I understand it.
Yes.
It was being recorded for the purposes of communicating what you were doing to a broader audience?
I have very vague understanding of the purpose of it. Probably I was making it to be maybe a training program with her permission, and I never, ever used it. As a matter of fact, I don't know how... May I continue?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know how, because when I was asked to, in the United States, that I was not coming back to my desk at all, I was to report to 55 Swanson Street and not go into Winlaton again. Everything was left there. And I did not use it as a training program. Maybe I instinctively thought it wasn't well done, which we now know it wasn't well done. I did not use it as a training program.
But clearly, by the fact that you recorded it, and for the purpose it would appear from your evidence then, it was designed as part of a training program, possibly, that you were confident that what you were doing was an effective type of intervention, surely.
I had the hope that in speaking with this young woman, I would be of some assistance. I want to make clear, I do not know how that tape, in my efforts with it, when I did not even use it, I do not know how that tape came into the hands of other people, because everything that was in my office stayed there, as far as I knew.
you don't know whether BGD revealed in triad therapy meetings that she was being sexually abused by her father?
I do not know that. And I've taken a position that I don't think she would have done it. I could be wrong, but I do not think she did it.
Well, you have simply no idea.
Do you?
I'm suggesting to you that
Your
these
Honour,
documents...
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm going
just
to-
becoming argumentative
Yes,
now,
very
Mr
well.
O'Brien.
Very well. I'll withdraw the question. You said, when asked about the questions and answers, that you had, that you, in your conversation with the young girl in that audio recording, were charitable, inappropriate,
Insensitive.
insensitive, and had the effect of blaming the child.
Yes.
Can I also ask that you accept that it was extremely damaging to the child?
She said it was. If you say it was.
That it, in fact, had the real possibility of setting back any rehabilitation that they might otherwise...
Do you know that to be true?
I'm suggesting to you that...
Again, Your Honour, I'm just concerned about the amount of time that Dr Slag has been in the witness box now, and this type of argumentative style of questioning really doesn't...
How much longer are you going to be, Mr O'Brien?
Maybe another 20 minutes or so.
We'll take the lunch break now and return at 2.